Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and we are continuing in our study of James. We have come to chapter 5. This is for March 12th, 2023, but you can listen to it any time you want, day or night. And we are looking at some abuses of money, the ups and downs of money, and James has some pretty strong words for people who don't understand their money and things like that, and what they're supposed to do with it, and how they're not supposed to get money ill-begotten. And I'll start out with James chapter 5 and verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Wow. When you think about the fact that we live in the United States of America and the richest country in the world, and you wonder, I wonder how much of that applies to us. Some of it, perhaps, individually. But this is talking about condemnation of the unrighteous rich. And we're going to look at the passage starting in verse 4. It says, Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which have been withheld by you, cries out against you, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. That's not the Sabbath, Lord of the Sabbath, it's Sabaoth. It's just not translated from the Greek. It means Lord of Hosts. And they got rich, evidently, by squeezing the poorest laborers that work for them. There's some very specific ways in which you're supposed to treat these very poor day laborers. And it says it in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 13. See if I can find that. Leviticus 19 and verse 13. You shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until the morning. Isn't that interesting? It goes on to say, You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. How you treat the poorest and disadvantaged among us matters to God. If there's a blind person, you don't move the furniture so he bumps into it, or put a stumbling block in front of him. If there's a person that can't hear, you don't curse at him, kind of making a joke and taunting him, and running him down without him knowing that. And when it comes to a very poor person, you pay him the night after he works the day, you pay him that night. You don't hold the money till the day. You give it to him right then, because if he doesn't get his money, he doesn't eat that evening. And so it's very, very important for you to treat these people righteously, even withholding their pay for a sleeping night. Well, you pay them right then. That's the fair thing to do. And, we in the United States of America may not relate to that very much, but there are places that are built on this economy still in our day and age. They have laborers who show up, and people who need laborers for the day come to where these people show up. They pick them up in a truck or something like that, take them out to where there's work. They work the whole day, and then that night they're supposed to pay them. It was a shock to me. I went into the laboring world, working at a steel mill, And it came to the end of the week, and I thought I was going to get paid. Oh no, we hold your pay for 2 weeks, and then you get your first paycheck. And when you stop working with us, you get a paycheck the next 2 weeks, after that as well. And it was kind of a shock. And then another shock was that when I got my paycheck finally, they took the cost of my shoes out of it. And then there was this stuff called FICA. And it was a big chunk of my pay and federal and state income tax. And I ended up not getting it nearly as much as what I thought. It takes a little bit getting used to. But the day laborer. Let me show something else to you. Look at Matthew chapter 20, and we're looking at verses 1 through 16. Maybe I won't read the entire passage. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. So at the crack of dawn, he went out to hire people, probably standing in the gate or in the city center, and there were some laborers, and he says, you come and work at my vineyard. And it says, when he had agreed with the laborer for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard, and they started picking. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And so 3 hours into the day, some had been working 3 hours already, he got some more laborers. And verse 4, and to those he said, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. And so they went, and again he went about the 6th hour, which would probably be noonish, and the 9th hour, and did the same thing, and about the 11th hour. You worked a 12-hour day, and he found people there on the 11th hour, and he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages. So that's just according to how it was supposed to be. You worked that day, and then that evening you got paid. And that was according to the law of Moses and how it was supposed to be. And so he paid the ones who were working 1 hour first. And it says, when those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. It's a full day's wage. When those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. Well, this isn't fair. You paid him a whole day's wage for 1 hour's work, and I worked a whole day, and you're paying me just a day's wages too? That's not fair. And he said, look, man, you got what was agreed upon. If I want to be gracious with what I have and give these people more than what they deserve, that's my business. Or is this a problem of your greed? And so that's a whole nother matter. But the reason why I read this was to give you an understanding that back at that time, and even some places in the economies of the world today, there are day laborers, and you're supposed to pay them the day that they work. And this was how they did it. And it says here in James chapter 5 that these people who mowed your grass or did your harvesting, and you withheld their wages or maybe even beat them out of their wages somehow, the Lord of the Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, is going to see this, and he's going to take it out of your hide one way or another. You're gonna get this put to you. You know, the Lord is the Lord of hosts, and the hosts are angels, at least part of them. And it says here in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 41, in a time of the Lord's harvest, when he reckons things, the Son of Man will send forth his angels, verse 41, Matthew 13, and they will gather out of his kingdom all the stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so these people who are squeezing the day laborers and just getting as much as they can and treating them as unfairly as possible, the Lord sees that. And he's going to put it to them. It goes on to say here in James chapter 5 and verse 5, you have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. Now, one of the examples that I could give to you would be the rich man and Lazarus. You can find this in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31, if you want to read the whole story. But it says that the rich man, he habitually dressed in purple, which is a very expensive clothing, and royalty or very rich people are the only ones that can afford this. But he habitually wore that stuff, and he ate sumptuously every day. And Lazarus, a very poor man that had physical problems, laid at his gate, just longing for the crumbs that fell from his table. And so this man, he lived wantonly, and he died, and Lazarus died. And when they woke up, Lazarus was in a good place of joy with Abraham, Father Abraham. And the rich man woke up, and he was in a place of torment. Many of us would call it the precursors of hell. And when the rich man realized that this was a fixed state and that he couldn't even get a drop of water on his tongue, and he was there forever, he said, "Oh, Father Abraham, please send Lazarus back to warn my brothers, because they're living just the way I have, and I didn't have any time for the things that I should have to prevent myself from being here." And Abraham had a very interesting thing. He said, "They have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them." Now, he had probably heard Moses and the prophets himself, but he didn't think that carried the day because he wasn't listening and paying attention. "Oh, no, Father Abraham, you don't understand, but if somebody from the dead, like Abraham, like Lazarus, goes back, they know who he is, they've seen him all the time, tripped over him practically walking through the gate, couldn't be bothered with him, but they recognized him. If he could come back from the dead, then they'd listen. They would end up here." And they said, no, it wouldn't even make a difference if somebody came back from the dead. Let them listen to the words of Moses. You know, God has a very interesting way of saying things. And his thing is, you listen to my words. You know, Adam and Eve decided to disregard my words, and it cost them. If you want saved, you need to listen to my words and eschew the worldliness and the words of the devil, and you have to come to me and trust my words. I just got this thing about you listening to me. My words are important. But he, being a rich man and wanting pleasure, he didn't think he needed anything, and now his life is required of him. So this was very, very sad. without a little bit of self-denial in your life, you end up living excessively, and you don't have time for the things of God. There's an interesting passage that Paul wrote as he was sitting in jail. We find that in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11, and he talks about a balance in life. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11, he says, "Not that I speak from want, because the Philippian church had sent him an offering to kind of help him with his needs. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction." There's a balance. You can be eating and still be thanking God before the meal for this food. You can have very little, but realize that you're very rich in God. It just evens out things. And, you don't get the big head. You don't think that somehow or another you're more wonderful than somebody else. And you don't let this money thing become a thing that is a buffer between you and reliance upon God. It goes on to say here in James chapter 5, you have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. Now, earlier in the book of James, James chapter 2 and verse 6, it says about the rich man, "But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court?" See, they have money and they can hire lawyers and they can sue you and they can do all kinds of things to you, and you don't have the resources and the wherewithal to protect yourself, and you can't even resist them. And so these rich people use their advantages. I know of a passage in the Old Testament. It's found in 1 Kings 21. I'll tell you the story. Here was Ahab, and he was in his palace. And as he looked out over the wall, he could see this beautiful vineyard that belonged to a neighbor of the palace, and it belonged to a man named Naboth. And he approached Naboth and he said, "Naboth, I want your vineyard. I want to turn it into a vegetable garden and have my vegetables and things there. I'll give you a fair price for it. I'll see that you get another piece of land that's as good." And he said, "Well, this is the family plot. This is what God had allotted to us by lot, and my people have owned this for hundreds and hundreds of years. You're probably talking 700 years here. So this is a family land, and he's very greatly attached to it." And he said, "No." Well, Ahab started to pout, and Jezebel said, "What are you pouting about? You're the king." And he said, "Well, he won't sell it to me." And she says, "I'll get it for you." Well, the way she got it was she threw a banquet, and she put two rotten guys next to him, and they both falsely accused him of cursing the king and cursing the name of the Lord. And so they stoned him. And because he was a criminal, they just confiscated his land. So, God sees these things. And he sent Elijah to meet Ahab, and Elijah said to Ahab, "Won't be long that the dogs who licked up the blood of Naboth, who you had killed on that land, will do the same thing, licking up your blood when you're killed right there too." So God sees it, and we need to be understanding that when we have a lot of money, we have a responsibility, and we need to be careful and kind and generous, and use it as a blessing rather than a way to keep score how we're doing. James points out that the unreformed rich will have a desperate end. Verse 1, "Now come, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you." Ah, that's nice. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Now you got to understand the uh, syntax in here. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. And so this is kind of looking into the future. And it says, your riches have rotted. And so it's giving you a glimpse of the future, but it says it now in the past tense. But it's in the future. So you got to understand how that works here. Your riches have rotted. Prophetically, it's being seen that that's what will happen. And your garments have become moth-eaten. Houses and barns and cars and clothes and shoes, all these things are subject to the second law of thermodynamics, and that is that as soon as you make something that is subject to the laws of decay, iron rusts, moths eat stuff, wood begins to rot. There's just a constant decay going on and on and on. Things just don't get better in the system, they get worse. You don't build a house and say, I built that house, that house was built 500 years ago, and it's just kept improving on its own since it was built 500 years ago. No, that's not, it goes downhill. And the only way you can keep it nice is by constant maintenance. And so even great kingdoms, pyramids, castles, things made of stone, the pyramids, we see them there, but they're just a shell of what they used to be. They've been destroyed in many ways. There have been things that you can see now, but they took the sand away. But there was noses chopped off and faces scoured away by sandstorms, and there have been great kingdoms that have been destroyed by the next conqueror, and so these things happen. So rust, and that bothered me a little bit because it said here, your gold and your silver have rusted. Well, gold doesn't rust. Silver tarnishes. There's an oxidation even on copper that turns it green, but gold doesn't rust so much. And so I looked at the word, and the word is kata and ios. And it's a compound word, and it means to rust down or to deteriorate. And that really is what should be in mind here. The idea it will be destroyed one way or another. And I have all things hoarded are subject to decay, fire, theft, or other forms of loss. Thieves can take it. These pharaohs, they thought that they would live forever, and they booby-trapped their graves, and they mummified their bodies, and they buried themselves with great wealth, and they hid their tombs and had it difficult to find. Well, grave robbers, they were very, very persistent, and they found them. But the only one they found was this young King Tut, and but they robbed graves all the time, and so all things hoarded or subjected to decay. Here's something that's kind of interesting. The temple of God that was there during the time of Jesus was in its 40th year or so of being worked upon. They'd work upon it a little bit every year, just improving it and improving it. It was magnificent by the time Jesus came along, and they were very, very proud of it. It had a gold capital all the way around the top of the temple, and he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." Of course, he was talking about his money, his body, but they never forgot that, and they did not like anything being said about possibly destroying that temple. It was a great source of pride, and it was very, very expensive. Well, they showed their lack of spiritual insight by killing the Savior that God sent to them. Who would have believed the report that they would have done that? But they did. And in 70 AD, that temple was overrun by the Romans. They torched it with fire. The gold melted off of the Capitol with the intense heat, came down and got between the mortar and the bricks, and they wanted that gold so much, and they tore everything down to get that gold. And the wealth of the temple and all the things that were in there were taken off to Rome. It enriched the Roman emperor at the time, and he used that wealth to build the Roman Colosseum. And so once again, the wealth of Israel and the spiritual bankruptcy all came about so that it was a witness against how it could be destroyed, and the Colosseum became a monument, therefore, of this great, great destruction. But it says here, and their rust will be a witness against you, and you will consume your flesh like fire in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. So in some ways that could be applied to unspiritual Israel. He is no fool who gives away what he cannot keep to gain what he can never lose. And our Lord said, don't become rich in this world, but rather be rich in the coming world. And our Lord's words in Matthew 19:20, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Just a quick survey of money and how it is a revealer of attitudes and values. Hold on to it improperly doesn't mean you can't have money, but you, in God giving you that money, sometimes He wants you to spread it around, hold some of it for yourself, but hold on to it improperly and you get burned, kind of like holding on to a hot potato in a hot potato game too long. Seeking money as an end all is a barrier to salvation. Ask the rich fool. Oh, I've done so well, I have to tear down my barns and put up new barns, and I just take my ease for the rest of my life. And God said, you fool, for tonight your life is required of you. And of course, the rich man and Lazarus, His riches got in the way, and he didn't even think about spiritual things. He was so insulated from the cares and concerns of the world, it didn't stress him any, and he didn't think he needed God, and it hurt him. By contrast, Zacchaeus, who everybody thought was a cheater, and he was a wealthy man, little short fella up in a sycamore tree, and Jesus said, I want to eat at your house tonight. And he said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor. And if there's anybody that thinks I've cheated them, I'll give them back 4 times. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this man's house. So in one way, money became a barrier and kept somebody from getting saved. In another way, money became a tool in the hands of a man to show that he was really repentant and he wanted to be right with God. Passing it on to others. You can show generosity and grace, like the vineyard keeper who paid a man who worked only 1 hour a full day's wage. On the other hand, it can show a person's greed and his covetousness, because the men who worked a full day, they thought they were going to get paid a whole lot, and when they didn't get that extra amount that they were hoping for, they were mad. But they got what they were bargaining for. So your attitude toward money and various such things like that, it can show that. In spending money, you can show you are a provider, and you provide for your home, you work for your family, and you're a good provider. It shows a very good thing about you. That's spending money. On the other hand, you can spend so wildly that you are akin to the prodigal son, and you spend a lot of money, but you spend it on yourself, or you spend it on drugs or liquor or whatever. In saving money, you can show to be a wise conserver, like the ant. Go to the ant, it says in Proverbs. And winter is coming, and so he puts away food and stores it so that when he can't get any more food in the winter, he has something to eat. That's pretty smart, isn't it? On the other hand, a person can save and save and save, and he doesn't allow any of it to be spent, even to have a little fun now and then, and he is seen as a cheapskate. That's in saving money. Are you a conserver wisely, or are you some type of cheapskate, you see? In accounting money, can show you as a decent, wonderful creditor, perhaps making interest for your loans to help people out. Maybe you are a redeemer that pays off a debt of somebody who fell on hard times. That was a relative, and you become the redeemer for them. Or perhaps you are a debtor in accounting money, and you live above your means, and you are in hock because of how foolishly you spend your money. And lastly, in what you value in life. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Now, maybe you might die poor, but you are rich in heaven. And God says you cannot serve God and mammon. You've got to make your choice, because money is a great tool, but it is a terrible, terrible master. May the Lord help you understand where you fit in the scheme of these things, and use money as a tool, and let it be a blessing, and store up wealth in heaven. Be generous. God's blessing upon you.